Alright. Sorry about that, everyone. Something weird happened with YouTube. Yeah, my internet connection was working fine, and for some reason YouTube stopped working. So anyway, if you were watching the video I was doing on the ATEM Mini Extreme and how to do SuperSource macros, I'm just going to kind of pick up where I left off there. But I'm going to really turn this into a Q&A, because I was pretty much done demonstrating what I was going to do as part of that video, and so I just went ahead and ended that one. But if you guys have additional questions, I'm certainly open to taking those here now. So I'm not going to do this for a long time. I am getting a little worn out, but if you guys have questions you want me to answer, whether it's about this or anything else, go ahead and fire those away in the chat room. So yeah, again, I don't know what happened. That was very, very strange. I'd not seen anything quite like that before. Like everything else on my internet connection was working just fine. For some reason, yeah, YouTube stopped accepting incoming video, and I lost my connection to the chat room and everything. So anyway, again, if you're watching this after the fact, we're in the process of live streaming my video on configuring the ATEM Mini Extreme to do the SuperSource macro animations that you see me do here on the channel, you know, and these kinds of things. So tested it, it works, and so I'm making the code available to do that later today. If something you're interested in, I can throw up a link to do that. So yeah, so there's the link for where that software is going to be. It's not live right now. It will be later today. I need to tweak some documentation, remove my workflow specific code out of the files, and then produce the zip file. That will be live later today for anybody who wants to use those animation macros, not with just the Mini Extreme, but any of the ATEM switchers that actually supports the SuperSource feature. So that's the 2ME Production Studio, 4ME Broadcast Studio, and Constellation, in addition to the Mini Extreme models, the two Mini Extreme models, the Extreme and the Extreme ISO. So, okay, so Grant Productions Media, I had no idea the size of the Extreme. Yeah, it is actually pretty big, isn't it? It's considerably larger than the ATEM Mini. The Mini name doesn't necessarily really apply any longer, does it? So, you know, it's bigger than my keyboard. Yeah, compared to the size of a mouse, there you go. An ATEM Mini itself is probably about like that, and a little bit shorter as well. But yeah, it's almost. Let me find the actual dimension here. So what's that? 14.5 inches wide, 5.5 inches deep. So it is kind of big. It would fit really easily with, even height-wise, it would fit really easily on a rack shelf. Single 1U rack shelf, an equipment rack. So if somebody wanted to do that, put that in a rack, you certainly could. It would fit just fine. So Obalor asking, what camera am I using? This is the Sony PXW-Z150. Let me highlight the chat room so you guys can see. So yeah, I use these cameras as my standard cameras for most events. I have 3 of those, and then I have 2 of their sister cameras. I have the Sony PXW-X70, which is the older one, and then I also have a PXW-Z90, which is the newer one. So the image quality out of all of them is fantastic, you know, for the price. I mean, yeah, you can get better cameras, no question. You know, I'm not pretending for a second that this is the best camera in the world, but for its $3,000 price, it's really hard to beat. One of the main reasons this camera looks so good is because it has a huge 1-inch sensor. It's able to capture a lot of light, so you can use it in a lot of situations where you couldn't use other cameras. So yeah, it really is my go-to camera for live events. It has the SDI output on it, so it integrates really nicely into a professional workflow. It's 4K, as you guys can see if you're watching this live stream in 4K. You can see that the cameras do 4K, and it does a really nice job of it, which is also really nice for the videos here on my channel where I'm able to cut in, you know, scale, crop, and still get a pretty usable image out of it. And you can't really say that about 1080. So 1080, you start to crop it, and it shows softness quite a bit. So yeah, so. John looks great. Nice to see the SuperSource stuff. Yeah, I was optimistic that the SuperSource stuff was going to work just fine with the ATEM Mini Extreme, and it does. You know, I in addition to the code changes that I made a few months back for my SuperSource stuff to work on the Constellation, those changes also enabled it to work on the Mini Extreme as well. So I really didn't have to do any changes this week in order to make the code work on the Mini Extreme. At least not the main code. I had a couple of buttons on my panel that I had hard coded to certain inputs, but the code itself that does the transitions does work just fine on ATEM Mini Extreme. So just not the old version that I published in the old videos. Those were hard coded specifically to the 2ME and 4ME switchers from Blackmagic. They didn't even work on the Constellation. So anyway, so I will be posting those the code that works on all of them. All the ATEM switchers that have SuperSource, that will go live later today at this link right here, the djp.li/SuperSource4. It's the 4th major version of the software, and that will be available later today. Not available now, so if you click it now, you won't get anything. But later today, that will become available. So yeah, Grand Productions looks to be around the size of the 4K ATEM. I assume you mean the productions, I'd say that the Television Studio Pro 4K. Yeah, it's narrower. It's definitely a little bit narrower than that, and certainly a lot less deep. But yeah, lengthwise, not too far away. Okay, BS. What made you choose the Terek Video Go instead of something like the Live View Solo? The big reason was the way that ShareLink works. It allows you to bond multiple connections. I did a video here a few weeks ago where I actually had 7 internet connections going simultaneously from the Teradek, and that's something that I don't believe the video can do. And the other reason is the monthly cost. So the video plans start at free. So if you don't do a lot of streaming, you can just use the free plan. The plan I'm on is the $25 a month plan that gives up to 50 gigabytes. It's really rare that I exceed that 50 gigabytes in any given month for the streaming that I do. So I never go over that $25 that price. So after you go above 50 gig, they start charging every gigabyte you transfer. So I never go over that. I shouldn't say never. I've gone over it once. In November, we did an event, 4-day event, 14 hours a day. And yes, I did go over that limit there. But every other month I've never gone over that. So my monthly bill, my monthly cost for using that is $25. The Live View Solo, their plan is $45 a month, unlimited, granted, but that's $20 a month more than what I need in order to do what I need to do. So I'm saving $240 a year. That adds up pretty quick. And the additional option of using a cell phone through their app to do bonding without having to buy dedicated data plans is also pretty nice, pretty amazing. So yeah, it's. I mean, it really is cost. It boils down to cost. So yeah. At work, we have a recommended production switcher. Can I determine the model from just a picture of the front, or is there a lot that look the same? There are some that look the same. If it doesn't show the name right on the front, then that kind of narrows down. So most of them, the rack mount ones, usually say the name on the front. So like mine, it says ATEM 2ME Production Studio 4K right across the front. So yeah. But for some of the other ones, like the Television Studio products, they don't have the name on them. But there's always distinguishing markings between the different models of that. And they only have one rack mount version of the current Television Studio. There was an older one, didn't have any buttons, but the newer one, there's only one rack mount version of that. So, yeah. Carl, how are you going to use this in your production environment? So, ATEM Mini Extreme, I probably won't, to be quite honest. The main reason I bought it was specifically for this YouTube channel. As I was saying before the previous stream got cut off, I bought one of the original ATEM Minis when it first came out, and I never used it even once for an actual production. I only used it for the YouTube channel here. The main reason is I have nicer switchers that are available. So I have a Television Studio HD, and I have the 2ME Production Studio 4K that I use here in the trailer, and those are more useful for me. I mean, they're SDI based, so you get the additional reliability of SDI over HDMI, and other features that are built into those that have not traditionally been available in the ATEM Mini line. Mini Extreme does change things quite a bit. It adds a lot of stuff that has not been available in ATEM Minis before, and has not been available in a lot of their other switchers, you know, like the SuperSource. That's not been available in the Television Studio line, the Production Studio 4K, or 1ME Production Studio switchers. So, you know, this has features that the other ones just don't. So, I mean, I'm gonna keep it. I'm not gonna just turn around and sell it or return it. I'll keep it around, but I don't actually have any plans to use this for real in a real production studio environment. So, yeah, it's like, again, I bought it specifically for you guys for the channel. So, Victor, would you use the Hollyland Mars 400S with HDMI and SDI as a wireless video source on your Switch? 400S, I don't remember which one that is. Most of the Hollyland wireless systems add a pretty significant latency to the signal, which basically means you can't intercut those with other wired cameras, because you'd always have a camera that's delayed compared to everything else. So if that's, I know they do have at least one model that has much lower latency, like less than 1 frame, and you could get away with that. But like most of their wireless products add 2 to 3 frames at least, and that's probably too much. That's enough that you would really notice it. So I ran into another thing this last week. This is from John. Friend Skarhoy from Denmark. Did you dig into remote controllers for switcher cameras, PTZ, etc.? I've never owned one. I know Casper. I've talked to him many times. I've met him in person and had conversations with him. Super nice guy, super smart, and his products are absolutely amazing. He's doing some really cool things. Main reason I haven't got one of his products is cost. They're expensive. I mean, they're really nice. They're really well done, but they are expensive, and they've got some amazing capabilities. You know, their control panels. They've got their scripting language that does an awful lot of things. It's really nice. However, for my workflow, I find that the X keys with just macros does more for me, and so none of that's way cheaper. So I've stuck with that. You know. Yeah, every product you buy, you got to weigh the decisions, weigh your different options, and see which ones are going to work best for the way that you work and for the clientele that you're going to be working for. And for me, I've found that the X keys controller with the Just Macro software, and me having a software development background, you know, I've been doing software development for 40 years now, for a long time. I know how to do that stuff. It comes very naturally to me, so I'm not intimidated in the least by something like Just Macros. In order to make it do whatever the heck I want to make it do. And that's something you just don't get with these other solutions. So, yeah, everybody's got to make their own decision for what's right for them. So, televisions, if it looks, okay, Bigsby, if it looks like a Television Studio HD, it's going to be a Television Studio HD, because that's the only product they have that actually looks like that. Their older Television Studio product didn't have any buttons or screens around the front. It was just a blank panel. So, yeah. The company is Skarhoy.com. Yeah, actually, that's a guy named Casper Skarhoy runs that company. Again, super nice guy, really smart, great products, just not right for my workflow. So if somebody else is considering it, absolutely, yeah, I fully recommend it, fully endorse it as a great product and something that's going to work well. It's going to be more reliable than BitFocus Companion, because he does use, Skyhoy stuff does use the official Blackmagic SDK to communicate with the switchers instead of doing this backdoor approach that Companion does. So yeah, it's going to be more reliable. But he produces great high quality products. There's no question in my mind about that. I don't doubt that for a second. But just not right for my particular workflow. So yeah, don't let the fact that I don't use them persuade anybody to not buy them, because they are great products. BS, do you think that Blackmagic will soon upgrade the Television Studio HD to a newer model since the launch of the Mini Extreme? your guess is as good as mine. I mean, at some point they're going to do it. They will upgrade the rest of their switchers. You know, they're producing these little inexpensive ones that do things that their higher end models don't, and you can't do that for very long before your other customers start to get mad at you that, you know, the cheap equipment does stuff that your higher end professional stuff doesn't. So, but as to when that's going to happen, I have no idea. You know, I have zero inside information. I have not read any rumors. I haven't heard from anybody who knows anything. Your guess is absolutely as good as mine. We've been thinking for a year and a half, 2 years, that they were going to update their other products with some of these capabilities, and they just keep cranking out new versions of the ATEM Minis instead of updating their other products. So, who knows? I mean, you'd hope that this has enough functionality that they don't feel like they need to produce anything bigger or fancier than this in this line, but we really don't know. So, yeah. Let's see. How would you rate the NVIDIA 2080 Super? I have a regular 2080, not the Super. It depends on what you're trying to do. If you're just doing video encoding, like video editing and video encoding, there's very, very, very little performance benefit you get from anything higher end than the 2060. And as we were building Witt's PC last summer, I did a ton of research into that, and I found that the 2060, 2070, 2080, and the super variants of all of those things didn't really run any faster for video applications, video editing applications. I mean, a little bit, but the margin is so small and just not worth the additional cost. They are super fast. Just give you one example. So the Dante video that I released here on the channel a couple weeks ago, that total video is 35 minutes long. It's in 4K. It's composed of, the original source footage is in ProRes 422, and there's a bunch of animated lower thirds that are used in that. Those are done in After Effects, and there's a whole bunch of scaling. So a lot of the clips are scaled. They're cropped in order to just kind of mix things up a little bit, and to hide some of the cuts that had to take place, because I wasn't necessarily super fluid in my delivery. So there's a bunch of scaling on the majority of the clips on the timeline. And then on top of that, there was a color LUT applied to the entire video. So 35 minutes of ProRes plus After Effects overlays plus scaling, images of other images that were scaled and moved and things like that. On my desktop computer, which has an RTX 2080 in it, it renders it in 11 minutes and 48 seconds. So basically 3 times faster than real time. So, and then I rendered it the same thing on the computer I have here in the trailer, which has a 2060, and the render time on that was 12 minutes and like 12 seconds or something like that. So a few seconds longer. And the CPUs in those machines are vastly different too. So my main computer that with the 2080, it's AMD 3950X, so 16-core chip. The one here in the trailer is a 3600. This is a 6-core chip that runs slower, and yet the difference in rendering times between those two is only 20 seconds, about 20 seconds on a 35-minute video. So if you're just doing video editing, high-end video cards don't really make much of a difference. What the most important thing is making sure you're getting a specific generation. So the 10 series, the 16 series, the 2000 series, the 3000 series, there can be significant jumps from one of those series to the next, but the specific model within those series doesn't really make a whole lot of difference for video-related For gaming, yes, absolutely, it can make a huge difference. But if you're running Adobe Premiere, DaVinci Resolve on those things, the specific model within a series really makes almost no difference, no noticeable difference in the real world. Anyway, so yeah. Is there anything you recommend as an HDMI audio injector, ideal with line level XLRs? I actually haven't looked into that. So I use SDI almost exclusively for video, and I have products that I use for doing injection embedding, is what they technically call it, with SDI. But HDMI, I haven't really done much research into that, so yeah, I don't know. So, Victor, sometime ago you done a review on the Hollyland Mars T1000 as a talkback system. Did you test its tally function? I can't really find anything on it. So I did not test it, mainly because the company never got me the hardware that you need to do that. So the body packs have, I believe it's an 1/8 inch jack, 3.5 millimeter jack on the side that's used for tally. In addition to that, you also need to have a very specific cable on the base station in order to send those signals to the wireless headset systems. They promised to send me one, and they never did, so I never got a chance to try that out. I don't have any reason to believe that it wouldn't work, but one thing is interfacing it into ATEM systems can be pretty pricey. In order to get the GPIO type of signal that you send into the Hollyland system, you need a box from Blackmagic that's $500. It's called the GPI Tally box. It's $495, and that converts the Ethernet on one side to the GPIO on the other side that you would then need to hook into the special cable for the Hollyland system. So it can be done, but it's pretty pricey. There are definitely a lot of other tally systems out there that are considerably less money that don't require that Blackmagic box to function. So if you're just looking for tally, there are any number of other solutions. And I've been in talks with a number of manufacturers to have them send me one of those systems. So far, none of them have actually followed through on it. So once someone actually finally does, I will be doing a review of one of those here on the channel. But as of right now, none of those companies have managed to send me one of those systems. So I can't say. So, all right, give me a chance to take a water break here. So. All right. Okay. Just okay. Tycho, I guess how you say that. What are your thoughts about NDI? I get this question every single live stream without fail. All right. So I need to just produce a video on this. NDI. It can work well if your switcher already supports it. So if you've already got a switcher from TriCaster, I got a TriCaster, or you have. If you're running vMix or another switcher solution that supports NDI, it can work really, really well. Within limitations, obviously. So those of us who are using more traditional video switchers, like Blackmagic, that either take, most of us that use SDI, or like one that has HDMI, NDI doesn't make any sense because the boxes to convert from NDI to HDMI or SDI are more expensive than other converters that we could use to get signals from cameras to switcher. For example, I use fiber in order to get signals from camera into my trailer. The Blackmagic fiber converter is $155. Then you add an $89 SFP module into it, and then you do one of those on each end. So you're roughly about $400, and you've got bidirectional fiber video. So that's uncompressed signal going both directions. So you're getting video from camera, video from switcher back to camera, so you can have a monitor on the top of your camera. In order to do the same thing with NDI, it's more money and more complicated. So again, if your switcher already supports it, great. But if you're looking to buy equipment, or you have a switcher that doesn't already have NDI, then NDI doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. The other thing is you got to watch out for your bandwidth limitations. You know, for most events that we do, 6 cameras, I should say most in-person events we do, 6 cameras is kind of our standard, kind of our minimum. And 6 cameras and NDI won't fit on a gigabit network. It's too much data to fit on a gigabit network, at least reliably. So realistically, yeah, it just doesn't work for people like me who are running more than a handful of cameras. Computer go to sleep? Yeah, looks like it did. Yeah, okay. So anyway, so yeah, NDI can work for certain workflows, but for the workflow that I have, it absolutely doesn't. It doesn't make any sense for the way that I work and for the equipment that I actually happen to own. So yes, I don't necessarily have anything against NDI, but I think people need to understand its limitations before they jump in. I know that people know that I'm excited about Dante, which is audio over Ethernet, but I'm less excited about video over Ethernet, just because Ethernet doesn't really have the bandwidth to do it, and NDI has some quirks. There is a video podcast, I guess you'd call it. It happens pretty much every morning. It's called Office Hours. It's run by a guy named Alex Lindsay. This is considered built up of a bunch of industry professionals, and a lot of cases have been doing video production professionally at very high end levels for many years. And whenever the subject of NDI comes up there, you can see all these guys who have been in the industry forever. You can see their eyes rolled in the back of their heads. Those who have tried it have run into enough limitations and enough problems that they don't use it any longer. So if you're building a small system, a couple of cameras, switcher already supports it, yeah, go ahead and use NDI, and it's going to work fine for you. But it doesn't scale. It doesn't scale well. So if you plan to grow and do more higher-end productions involving a lot more equipment, it's probably not an investment that I would make personally. So. Looking at the new setup with NDI is planning on doing 10 gigabit towards cameras and just pull one wire towards vMix. Yeah, you can do it and it'll work. 10 gigabit tends to get pretty pricey. So yeah. All right. Okay. Those fibers, are there mults available for like 4 cams? So yeah, go back and look on my channel here. About almost exactly a year ago, I have it just here off to the side. I bought a cable, has 24 strands of fiber, and in theory I could run 15 cameras off of that one cable, plus networking, plus return feeds, plus audio, all over one. That's kind of my standard way that I work. Like so, I've got my trailer, I pull it into a venue. I run my trunk cable from the trailer into the venue. That plugs into a breakout box, and then the breakout box I run fiber to cameras. So the signal coming from camera stays fiber all the way from camera into the trailer, so it stays optical the entire path, which means no compression, no additional delay. Yeah, it just works really well. So I can't say that I would recommend that solution for everybody, but for me it was the right thing to do. So, all right. Echo Cobra, a device that makes audio levels around the same level. So what you're looking for is a device called a compressor, an audio compressor. That's not the same type of compression when we talk about things like MP3s. It's an actual device that compresses the dynamic range of an audio signal. So it takes what effectively... Okay, so a compressor basically takes signals as they get loud and brings them down in level. So once it reaches a certain threshold, your volume, once it bumps up against a certain threshold, anything past there, it automatically brings it down at some sort of ratio. So if you set it for 2 to 1, if it would normally go up by this much, after it runs through the compressor, it goes up by this much. And what you do with a compressor like that is you compress the signal past a certain kind of standard level. So anything above that, you compress it, bring it down, and then because you brought it down, that gives you more headroom on the high end. So then you can bring the entire signal level up to where you need to be. So there are many different compressors out there. They all have pros and cons. In my trailer, the audio channel that I have for this microphone, it goes through a compressor on my mixer, and then the output of my mixer goes to a 6-band compressor. So it's a lot more sophisticated than a standard compressor. It takes the audio frequencies, 20 hertz over here, 20 kilohertz over here, and divides that into 6 individual bands, and each one of those bands has its own compressor and is compressed separately. And the more bands you split that up into, the more smooth, the more transparent, the less audible that compression is. And so the signal that you guys are hearing here on YouTube stream today is really heavily compressed in order to make sure that I get those levels up as loud as I can, so that people don't have to turn up their volume on their speakers or on their earphones or whatever, their TV, whatever they're watching on. So I bring up the level a lot and keep it pretty consistent, pretty level throughout the entire stream. And I do that as a standard thing with all the video streams that I do for my company. But because I'm using a 6-band compressor, I can have it be really aggressive and apply a lot of compression, and the audible effects of it are fairly minimal. I mean, if you know what to listen for and you listen for it, it's clearly there, but it's a lot less noticeable than just a single band compressor that's cranked to the max. And so the combination of those 2 compressors in my audio chain is what allows me to have a very consistent, very even level across the output of my audio system into my switcher and then into a live stream. So yeah, if you want to have nice consistent level audio, you have to engage compressors into your chain. Multi-band compressors are really kind of the secret sauce that take your audio up to a new level. Unfortunately, those are becoming fewer and fewer available. In fact, I'm not even really aware of any manufacturer that's still making them. So you're stuck buying old used equipment. There are two models that I recommend. One's called the TC Electronic Finalizer, especially the Finalizer 96K. Great product, incredibly expensive even on the used market. The other one that you look at is called the Behringer Ultradyne Pro DSP 9024. It's the one that I'm using. You can pick them up on eBay for $100 or less, and they work great. They are a fantastic product. They're old. I mean, the one I have now is 20 years old, but it does a fantastic job of audio compression and keeping those audio levels nice and consistent. So, but yeah, if you want to have a nice consistent level of audio, as I'm looking at my level meter here and I talk, it's just not changing. The level meter is just nice and consistent, nice and solid. If you want to be able to do that, you really need to have compressors, and I highly recommend going with a multi-band compressor. And I'll have to do a video someday on how to configure those, because it's not exactly trivial to set them up, but that's the equipment that you use to do that. So, yep. Okay, any caveats or downsides with the TP-Link 108 switches you use? I have not found any. So the TP-Link switches that I have a lot of TP-Link switches in my production setup, and the reason I keep going with them is because I try other manufacturers and they let me down. I have tried TrendNet, I have tried Netgear, I have tried Linksys. I've tried a whole bunch of them, and one way or another they somehow don't work for my workflow, and so I've just kind of settled on mostly buying TP-Link. I still have others, you know, but the majority of my network switches are TP-Link, and they've worked great for me. I have not had a single one of those things fail or act up in any way. They've just been absolutely rock solid. So, yes, if you're looking for a network switch that's going to be reliable and affordable, the TP-Link models have been fantastic for me. So, Paolo, NDI is great for graphic solution. We use NewBlue's Tidal live broadcast, and so far we are very happy with it. Yeah, that is a situation where NDI can work really, really well. But again, it only works if you have a switcher that already supports NDI, you know, on NewTek TriCaster or vMix or whatever. Because if you have to convert it to SDI for one of these other switchers, SDI or HDMI, the cost, it's more to do that than it is to go with something other than NDI in the first place. So, Tycho, how do you manage people walking on and around fibers? Aren't they super fragile? The fiber itself inside is pretty fragile, but the cables that I use are what they call armored. So they actually have a layer of metal around the outside. It's in a twist, it's in a spiral that helps protect those things. And so they're very well protected. You could have people walk on them, cars drive over them, whatever, and they're fine. So I've had a few fiber cables break in the past. It's never because of damage to the actual fiber strand itself. It's because somebody yanks on it, pulls it out, trips over it, and gets pulled out. But you'd have the same problems with any sort of cable, no matter what it is. So in the real world, if you buy armored fiber, they work just as well as copper cable, actually better, because of the distance limitations. You just don't have them for in any practical application. So copper cable, 100 meters is kind of the max you get with pretty much any sort of copper signal. Fiber, you can go for miles, multiple kilometers without issue. So, alrighty, ATEM HD, what is the best titler program for lower thirds? I am not the right person to ask that question to. I have not spent very much time with the different software out there for making titles, mainly because I created my own. As I've mentioned many times, I've been doing software development for 44 years, professionally for 30, what's the math? 36 years. I'm doing software professionally for 36 years. So I create a lot of the tools that I use, and one of the tools I created was the software that I use for generating graphics. So I don't have a lot of hands-on practical experience with the commercial solutions that are out there, just because I have my own software that does exactly what I need, and if I run into a situation where it doesn't, I just modify it to do whatever I happen to need for a given event. So bottom line is, I don't know. I haven't spent enough time with the various pieces of titling software out there to know what's going to be best. So, okay, let's see. We own an ATEM Television Studio HD and a couple of Viltrox DC90 EX 4K field monitors. What solution do you recommend to use Tally on the Viltrox field monitors? I don't think that model actually has Tally built into it, does it? So I haven't worried about it because my Blackmagic camera converters, it's a silver box I've shown on here on the channel a few times, it actually handles the Tally stuff by itself. So it has little LEDs on the box itself, but it also puts a red box around the video that's being output to the monitor. So I don't have any connection to the monitors for Tally. The Tally is being generated by the camera converter box, and it gets that information directly from my ATEM switcher. So yeah. So yeah, I don't. If you want to have Tally with monitors that don't natively support it, then you're going to want to look into one of the third-party Tally solutions that are out there. Unfortunately, I can't remember off the top of my head what those are, but there's a number of ATEM-compatible Tally systems that are out there. Victor, I thought your digital mixer has a built-in compressor. My Yamaha TF3, my main mixer here in the trailer, it does have compressors built in, and I do apply compression to each individual channel, but I keep that compression kind of light because it becomes fairly audible. It's only a single band. So the entire frequency spectrum from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, if any one frequency gets really loud, it lowers the level of all frequencies. And so that compression becomes very clear, it's very audible, you can hear it very easily if you know what to listen for. So I use that one sparingly. That mixer also does have a 3-band multi-band compressor that you can apply to one of the aux outputs. You can't put it on the main. I don't know why they did that, but you can apply it to one of the aux outputs, and I could use that, but it's only 3 bands, and I've got this other separate compressor that's 6-band that frankly has way more controls, way more adjustments. And if you know how to use those controls and that you get those adjustments, you can actually make a much more transparent compression than you can get with the one that's built into my mixer. So traditionally, outboard gear has a lot more flexibility and very often sounds better than the effects that are built into a mixer. But a lot of people don't necessarily use outboard gear because of the additional expense and the additional complexity of sending signals to and from and hooking up all those cables. So like for reverb, you know, I've got a really nice couple of Lexicon reverb units that sound better than the reverbs in my Yamaha mixer, but I don't use them because all the cabling and the complexity of having the signals leave the mixer and come back just make it not worth it. In the case of this compressor, I take the final output of the mixer, run it through the compressor, and the output of the compressor is what goes over to my ATEM switcher. So the connectivity there was easy. I just add one additional device in the chain output from the mixer. So and it goes through a patch bay, so I can patch in and out as needed if I wanted to. But anyway, it just sounds better. You know, it's in case of compression, you don't want the compression to be something that you hear, and the Behringer unit I have is exactly that way. It requires it is a lot more transparent than the one that's built into my Yamaha. So. Fareed asking, how about Ubiquiti? Ubiquiti also makes great stuff. I don't have a lot of personal experience with their switches. I hear they're really good. I've heard a lot of people who have owned or used them talk very favorably about them. So, yeah. If you're considering Ubiquiti and one of their products meets your needs, absolutely go for it. So, yeah. Neil, have you used other TP-Link stuff, access points? How were they reliability-wise? I had one TP-Link switch that access point that I used to use here in the trailer that was not exactly super reliable, and I was trying to use it in a way that they hadn't really fully tested it. So, as I've mentioned many times here on the channel, I have multiple virtual LANs, VLANs running here in the trailer, and I needed an access point that supports multiple VLAN feature. And I bought one of their early models that had that feature, but apparently they hadn't really tested it with that. And when you put it into that mode, it would start doing weird things. And so I gave up on it, and I eventually replaced it with other TP-Link access points, and those have worked just fine. I haven't had any problem with those at all. They've worked flawlessly. So yeah. So yeah, other TP-Link equipment I've had good luck with as well. I don't think I've had, other than that one access point, which in retrospect, trying to make it do something that it hadn't really been tested and wasn't really fully supported. I had to put beta firmware on it in order to get it to do that. Everything else has worked just fine. So yeah. Jeremy, what's been your experience with Ubiquiti monitors? I haven't used a lot of them. I've had a handful of them over the years. I haven't used them in a video production environment. I've used them. Let's see. I think I have a couple of Ubiquits in my truck, if I remember right. I have actually a nice video system in my truck. I think a couple of those are Ubiquiti, and they've been fine. You know, they've actually worked just fine. So yeah, yeah. All right. Bigsby, that sounds like going to be an expensive cable. Fiber trunk cables are expensive. That's just the way that it is. And it's not because the fiber cable itself is expensive. It's because the termination, putting the ends on, is actually pricey. So you can get a really long cable, and it doesn't cost that much more than a short cable with the same number of connectors on it. Yeah, it can get pricey. My main fiber cable uses MTP24 connectors, so it's a MTP style with 24 strands. That particular cable type is pretty pricey. But if I put LC connectors, which is a standard connector that the Blackmagic stuff use, if I just gone with LC connectors, the price of the cable would have been about half what it was with the MTP. I mean, the nice thing about the MTP is it's one connector transferring 24 signals instead of having to plug in 24 individual ones. But you do pay a price for going with those higher end connectors. So yeah. Spencer, what do you use as a router? So I am using a Ubiquiti Edge Router X here in the trailer. So it's a little $49 unit. It has 5 Ethernet ports. Very configurable, very powerful. I configured it in such a way that it automatically monitors the status of multiple internet connections and then automatically does a failover from one to the next whenever there's a problem. So my primary connection that I get through a venue goes down, it automatically fails over to a Wi-Fi connection if I have one of those, and that fails over to the cellular connection I have here in the trailer. And I did that all through the Ubiquiti configuration, the user interface on that Edge Router X. It's something that they actually support natively. Very cool. That's a great little product. It has a very steep learning curve, so if you're not a networking person, you'll be frustrated till the end of time trying to figure it out. But if you understand computer networking, great little product. I can't recommend it for everybody, though, because of the complexity. But for anybody who has a networking background, great product. So, yeah. Victor, you have a good few different cameras. How do you color match them before a stream job? Are you doing it in ATEM software? No. The cameras that I use are all in the same family. So the Sony PXW Z150, the Sony PXW X70, and the PXW Z90 are essentially the same camera, just in different bodies. And so they just color match to one another perfectly out of the box. I don't have to do anything fancy or anything crazy with those. If I do have to include another camera, then you do get into doing some color matching. And I did a video a couple years ago. It's when I introduced my lutmath.com, LUTMATH.com site, where I showed how to do color matching between different cameras. So if you want a tutorial on how to do color matching and how to use a tool that I've created to make that easier, go find that video here on the channel. So just do a search for lutmath.com, and I walk through the process and do a demonstration of how to do that. So yeah, so that's kind of the workflow process that I use for color matching cameras that are not part of that Sony family. So yeah, as long as you have cameras that are all similar, you make sure that your white balance and picture profile settings are the same, and they should just match as long as your lighting is consistent. But when you introduce other manufacturers or other products that are part of a different family within the same manufacturer, that it really becomes much of an issue. The computer keeps going to sleep. So yeah, wait for it to wake back up again. Okay, all right, where are we at? How would you add sound effects, quick sound effects, say an applause or a quick transition sound, etc.? you're not going to like the sensor. I would write my own piece of software to play those files and have the output of that go through Dante's their virtual sound card and then into my TF3 mixer. For anybody else, just take the audio output of a computer, run it into your mixer, and then I don't know what software I'd look for. I haven't really looked to see what tools are available out there in order to trigger those. I know there's stuff out there. I just haven't looked because if I ever needed to do that, I would just come up with my own solution. So, Paolo, the Viltrox DC70EX 4K has tally embedded. You can see the lower left has a tally, and I also have 2 LEDs on the front. Okay, all right. So what that's expecting. Get stuff in my throat. What that's expecting is that's not TTL. It's a ground signal. So the connections in there. It will light up the tally when there's a pin on the input that's grounded then. And with the Blackmagic stuff, you have to get that GPI tally box and then run cables to each camera if you want to do that. So it's an ugly solution. It would work, but it is kind of an ugly solution, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, especially if your cameras are far away from one another. So you'd be better off with a wireless tally system that you put on top of your camera. Alright, if you're in an event where you need to take your portable flight case inside of a venue, I believe I remember you saying that you can still communicate with your trailer. Could you explain how that works? Well, I guess it depends on... So if you're talking about my flight case, my fly pack based on Television Studio HD, I wouldn't use that with a trailer. Not unless I explicitly needed an additional switcher. So, but if I needed to bring my main switcher into a venue, communicating with the trailer is really just done over Ethernet, because all the audio for intercom and everything just goes over Ethernet or fiber. So yeah, it's just the equipment that's switching the video is separate from the equipment that I use for intercom and everything. So yeah, I can remove that, move it somewhere else, and that doesn't affect my intercom or anything, the way that works. SuperSource plus 2 DVE equals 6 boxes. Yeah, it does. The Mini Extreme can do that. The trouble with that is you have to create macros in order to do that smoothly, because you can't just recall SuperSource and have it do all 6 sources. That only gets you 4, and you have to configure the DVEs to do the additional 2. You can do it. You know, a macro can absolutely do that. I would worry a little bit about whether you can switch to that on the fly, or whether you need to do it to preview first, because I don't know that you're going to get all 6 of those boxes appearing on screen at the same time. And my animation code doesn't work with those additional DVEs. I tried, and I found that there was bugs somewhere in the system, and it would work for about 1 or 2 transitions and then just stop. And it wasn't in my code. I spent tons of time checking. I lost complete communication with the switcher through just macros when I did that. But yeah, I mean, if you want to do static layouts, program some macros on the switcher in order to do that, and then you can actually make it work. But yeah, it's because they're not all part of the same system. It's a little bit cumbersome in order to do all 6 at the same time. So, Fareed, would you recommend the new Sony FX3 for video? I don't really recommend any cinema-style cameras for live video. They're meant for 2 different things. You can make it work just the same way that you can use a camcorder like this to help shoot a movie, but they're not ideal. They're not designed for that, and so you run into certain limitations. One of the big limitations you run into, well, a couple big ones. First of all, finding zoom lenses for those cameras is difficult. There aren't a lot of them available, and the ones that do exist tend to be very pricey. So if you're in a situation where you need to constantly zoom in and out, especially as part of a shot, you have a motion shot that includes a zoom, you're going to be spending a lot of money on lenses in order to make that happen. It's not part of that. It's not part of a cinema workflow to do a motion zoom. You don't find that happening. The other one is that cinema cameras tend to have very large sensors in them, which means you get a very shallow depth of field, or can. Very often we'll get a very shallow depth of field, which means that focusing for a live event where things are not pre-scripted, pre-choreographed, can be very difficult. So if you got someone who's walking around and you're having to manually focus that, you're in for a frustrating day. So if you got a subject that isn't moving and you don't need to zoom, those cameras can look amazing for live video. They can look fantastic. But, you know, the reason we use the style of cameras that we do for live video is to be able to accommodate those situations where we need a motion shot. We need to be able to track a subject that's moving around, those kinds of things. And so, just very, very different. And the other thing is, like a lot of those cinema cameras, they're not designed with a minimum latency to the outputs in mind either. So I haven't tried the FX3, but a lot of the, like for example, the GH5 that a lot of people use, it's got a terrible latency on the output. It's got a very long delay from the time the light goes in until the signal comes out the HDMI port on the side. It's one of the reasons that people believe HDMI has latency, because most of the cameras that only have HDMI have latency on them. It's not the HDMI that's at fault. It's because you're using a camera that was not designed with live use in mind. The cameras that are designed for live use have very short latency. They're designed to get that signal out the port on the back of the camera as quickly as possible. So you really will do best by buying equipment that's made for the very specific task that you're trying to accomplish with it. So if you only have cinema style cameras available and you're need to do live, yeah, you can absolutely make them work and you can end up with a beautiful image, but you've got some restrictions there. So just something to keep in mind. So, alright, we have a Blackmagic TalkBack converter 4K into a 40x40 to a Mac Mini with deck link for recording. What's your suggestion to send timecode to the inputs on the deck link so we can sync in post via timecode to Premiere? That's going to depend on your camera, actually. So if you got a camera that has a timecode input, just well, it depends on which switch. If you got a switcher that has timecode output, it's easy. You just take the timecode output of your switcher and then feed that into the timecode input on your cameras. Otherwise, you can take any sort of other timecode source, you know, like a Tentacle Sync or something like that, and feed that into your cameras. A lot of people don't seem to know this, but timecode is just an audio signal, so it can be input to any audio input on a camera. So even cameras that don't have timecode inputs, you just have the timecode go to one of your audio channels, and then you can use the tools that come with your timecode device to convert that to something that a linear editor can actually use for doing syncing. So for Reed, most people are looking for the board background type portrait image now. Any solution like that with camcorders? Depends on which one you get. So in order to get that really blurred background, you have to get a large sensor. It's just basic physics, basic optics. So the bigger the sensor in your camera, the easier it is to achieve those blurred background effects. This camera that I'm using here, the PXW Z150, it has a 1-inch sensor in it, which in the world of camcorders is absolutely enormous. The majority of camcorders that are out there use a 1/3 inch sensor. So this sensor is 9 times larger, which means it captures a lot more light, which means it also has a greater ability to blur the background. Now, you're not seeing much background blur behind me here. You know, the monitors behind me are only, what, 2 feet behind me? Not much difference there. But I have seen these cameras produce a stunningly shallow depth of field under certain conditions. I was shooting a corporate video last Wednesday, and we were using these cameras. We had a shot where we were shooting down the length of a pipe, and that shot, the amount of the pipe that was in focus was probably only about like that. It's probably only about 2 inches deep, and everything else was out of focus. So big sensor is really the answer. But beyond that, back up, zoom in, make sure your iris, your aperture is opened up all the way, and that's going to give you the best option for getting shallow depth of field. Now, keep that in mind. If you got a subject that's moving around, you probably don't want to be doing that, because it's going to lose focus. And if you're manually focusing, you're going to have a really hard time locking on focus exactly. So, yeah, big sensor, back up, zoom in. That's going to give you open iris. That's going to give you the best opportunity for shallow depth of field. If you want the formula to be able to figure out how much how shallow the depth of field can be, take the current focal length of the lens in its native format, not in the 35 millimeter equivalent. divide that by the current f-stop of the lens. And that'll give you, it's kind of an arbitrary number, but what it really reflects is the physical size opening of the lens. And that will tell you, that number will give you a rough gauge for how shallow your depth of field is going to be. So if you got like a 200 millimeter lens, it's f2, that number is 100, that's really high. You're going to be able to get super shallow depth of field. But if you got a 35 millimeter lens that's like f1.8, that number is like a 2. So very little opportunity for shallow depth of field on those. So anyway, that's kind of a rough gauge for how you're going to know. And like in all these cameras, even though they don't have 35 millimeter sensors in them, they tend to express the zoom, the focal length in terms of 35 millimeter. So do a little bit of research to find out what the native focal length of the lens is, and then use that in that formula. So actual focal length divided by current iris, and that'll give you a rough idea of how much depth of field you're going to get. Bigger number, the more shallow your depth of field is. So. Okay, do you have a wireless camera unit and operator during a broadcast show? Like if you need a camera to be mobile, blah, blah, blah. If yes, what solution? So there's any number of wireless systems that are out there. I have, is it handy? Is that it? Oh, I think that's not it. Nope, that's not it. I have a Cinegears. I reviewed it here on the channel. It's a Ghost Eye 200M. So I'm not going to pull it out of the case, but yeah, so there's the receiver, there's the transmitter. I know you can't see much there, but that's what I use when I need wireless. It has worked really well. I've been really happy with it. No complaints there. The Teradek Bolt series products tend to work really well. Hollyland makes a number of wireless systems. Be really careful though if you go to Hollyland systems, because the majority of theirs have a pretty significant delay in the wireless transmission system. Make sure you get one of the Pro models that has what they claim to be 0 millisecond delay. But yeah, they can work really well. Keep in mind that all of these systems don't work through walls very well. They operate in the 5 gigahertz range, and 5 gigahertz signals just don't like to penetrate objects very well. So if you're going to be in an area where you're going to have obstructions between your camera and receiver, it's better to just figure out a way to go wired and deal with hassles of wireless. So, all right, let's see. 2 HDMI out work like aux. I don't know which you're referring to. If you're talking about the Mini Extreme, each of the HDMI outputs can output pretty much any signal you want. So you could use one like an aux if you want. But I think most people are going to want to use multi-view on one and then program on the other. That's kind of what it was designed for. So, all right. Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro G1. I guess probably talking about camera with shallow depth of field. That's a super 35 millimeter sensor, so that is pretty big. So yes, that would be a way to get a pretty shallow depth of field as well. My caution about the Ursas is they don't do very well in low light. For whatever reason, I don't really know. But yeah. Palo. We're actually thinking on building a tally system using M5 stick ESP32 units, around $15 each, probably the best option for us. Go over to Aaron Parecki's channel. He did a video a little while ago where he built a wireless tally system pretty inexpensively there as well. So go check that one out. I don't remember which one it was, but he did do a video on that. So, Steven, do you know if Media Express will automatically take the timecode from the camera? If I got a tentacle sync and ran them in the cameras in the 40x40, the tentacle sync would not work with that. I don't think Media Express supports timecode, but I don't know that for sure. Not something I've ever tried, never tested, so I'm not really know for sure. So, all right, Jeremy Joe, I'm planning to make a tutorial about how to write the scripts to make Companion Stream Deck work with just macros in your software. I just did a video about that. Like, we just ended it like right before this video. So, yeah, so go back and watch the other video that I just barely live streamed right before this. So, I see the Stream Deck here. Do you use it in production at all, or just for YouTube? Well, I was going to. I have the Stream Deck here, and then I have a Stream Deck XL right here. And I spent a ton of time configuring, especially the XL. I've got probably 8 pages that are full of buttons. You know, it's 32 buttons on that guy, and most of those 8 pages, 8 or 9 pages, actually I have more than that, are full, you know, of different macros that I've created. I was super excited about using it, and then for the first actual event where I really used it for real, I had about 2 weeks ago. We did a live stream for a film festival award show. My switcher locked up completely in the middle of the show, and it just stopped responding. It stopped taking commands. It was still passing video, but it was stopped. It didn't. It wouldn't accept any commands from anywhere. So whether it was just macros or companion, or even from the front panel was non-responsive too. I talked to an engineer, one of the guys who designed the ATEM switchers, and he said that was a software freeze within the switcher, and he says the only reason that they've ever actually seen that happen is because of communication with third-party software libraries, which in this case probably was Companion, because that was the only third-party software that I had connected to it. Now, I had Just Macros running as well, but Just Macros uses the official Blackmagic SDK in order to communicate with the devices, so Just Macros isn't talking directly to the switcher, it's talking through other Blackmagic software to talk to the switcher. That's the official supported way of doing it. Companion, on the other hand, uses an open source third-party library that's not the Blackmagic SDK to communicate with the switcher, and so they're kind of backdooring their way into communicating with the switcher. And the general feeling I got from the email that I got from the ATEM engineer was that Companion was very likely the source of that crash. And because of that, I am gun shy on trying to use Companion for any sort of actual productions where I have a paying client moving forward. I don't have a problem toying with it for like here on the stream, on my YouTube channel or whatever, but I don't think I'm going to try it again for a paying client for a while, until I've had a lot more time to more thoroughly test it. I don't feel like I can trust it at this point. I mean, because that was super embarrassing. Have my switcher die in the middle of the live stream, and had to reboot it. You know, the stream actually went dead for that 30 seconds or whatever it took the switcher to reboot. Very embarrassing. Something I don't ever want to happen again. And so I'm really, really gun shy about using Companion moving forward. So I did absolutely go into panic mode. If you want to see it happen, I was live streaming the inside of my trailer and what was going on to the paying members of the channel and Patreon supporters. So I have the video of me reacting to this happening. So if that's something that interests you, you can join the channel and go watch that video. It's something I published 2 weeks ago. It's still up. I intend to leave it up for that group of people, so you can see exactly how it went down and my reaction and what we did in order to sort of work around it. So yeah, and the bottom line is I just don't feel like I can trust Companion. I know a lot of people have used it without any problem whatsoever. I'm pushing it a lot harder than most. You know, I've got this thing communicating with probably 15 different devices. I've got it communicating with my intercom system, with all my video recorders, all my HyperDeck studios. So that's 8 of them right there, in addition to my switcher, my routing switchers, my 2 video routing switchers, my audio mixer, my Yamaha. I've got it communicating with all those things, and Just Macros as well. I probably encountered some weird bug with that combination of all those devices. And so it's not something that everybody's going to encounter, but at the same time, I don't want to necessarily reduce the amount of functionality that I'm using with it. So moving forward, my plan is to remove the portions of that where I'm communicating with the ATEM switcher and just communicate with everything else that I have in the trailer. So I'll still continue to use it, but I'm not going to be using it for controlling my ATEM anymore moving forward. At least not for live use, for paying clients. So yeah, but bottom line, it was most likely, very likely, the Companion software causing a crash in my ATEM switcher. So that was the only new variable that had been introduced to it. You know, I'd been using this same switcher with Just Macros and X keys for 5 years, 4 years with the new switcher, 5 years in total with various ATEMs, and never encountered a problem like that ever before. So this was the first real production where I had Companion running, and about 2/3 of the way through the event, the switcher crashed, and very likely it was Companion that caused it. So, yeah. All right, Steven, what does the BM Mini Converter sync generator do? I bought one and ran it to the reference deck link, but I'm honestly not sure if it's doing anything. All right, so in order to answer that, I have to kind of explain what genlock is a little bit. Back in the analog days, before we, excuse me, been talking too long. Back in the analog days, before we really took on digital switchers, your camera sources all had to be synchronized with one another, so that it's drawing all the cameras are starting at the top of the frame, top left pixel, or not, they weren't pixels in those days, but top left portion of the image, drawing to the left to right, top to bottom. They all had to be in synchronization with one another, perfect synchronization with one another. And in order to do that, they would have a sync generator in the facility, a master sync generator, and the output of that would go to all the cameras, and then the cameras would synchronize to that, and then the output of the cameras would go to the switcher, which was able to switch between the different sources easily because they were all in sync. So in order to switch from camera A to camera B, it just says, okay, at the end of this frame, we're just going to switch from the input on camera A to the input on camera B. That's the way those things worked. If you had a camera that was not in sync, you had to get a frame sync device. This is all stuff I've used, by the way. I used to own a lot of this stuff. So you'd have a frame sync device, which would buffer any video coming in, and then the output of the frame sync would then be synchronized with all the cameras that are there in the facility. So what that device you have is doing is generating that synchronization signal to send to all your cameras, in this case your HyperDeck, whatever, so that the video output of all those devices is synchronized going into your switcher. The switchers we use today, including all the ATEMs, have frame syncs built in. That's just part of the equipment. They include that from the factory. So you don't have to have synchronized sources in order to be able to switch between different cameras. The advantage of having synchronized sources is much lower delay from camera input to switcher output. It can be shorter by as much as a full frame of video. Super useful if you're doing IMAG. So that's what it is, image magnification. That's where you have the output of your cameras being shown on monitors or projectors in a venue. In those situations, you want to have absolute minimum delay you can get away with, because you don't want people to be seeing video that's delayed on the projector compared to what they're seeing in person. People notice that. You know, it's distracting, particularly when the video is out of sync with the audio. So if you're working in that sort of scenario and your cameras all all have a reference in, a genlock in, and your switcher has a reference in, and all your playback devices, like your HyperDecks, have a reference in, then it can make a lot of sense to actually have a timecode generator, or not, sorry, a genlock, a sync generator, synchronizing all those sources, so that the video sources coming into your switcher don't have to be delayed in order for them to line up and be in sync with one another. Now, if you got sources that are not, the switchers are able to accommodate that because they have the built-in frame syncs. What they do is they just delay any incoming video so that the top of the frame coming in gets delayed until it lines up with the top of the frame of everything else. So just hooking up a frame sync, just hooking up a timecode, I keep saying timecode. It's not timecode. It has nothing to do with timecode. Hooking up a signal sync generator to your cameras, you won't see any visual difference right away. But if your entire signal chain has the reference end connected to the same frame sync, you can see up to a 1 frame improvement in the signal delay coming out of your switcher. So that said, even though I've got a ton of equipment in here, and I do some high-end productions, I don't have one. I don't use it. So I just don't find that it's necessary for most situations. So between my camera and my switcher, I've got cameras that I use and my switcher, I have a very minimal delay coming out of it. So even when I'm doing IMAG, the amount of delay going to a projector is very, very minimal. So not necessary, but can be helpful in certain situations. So yeah. Okay, Bigsby, I come from a corporate IT world and we have high availability with redundant servers, etc. Is there anything you can do in production world with switchers, or are we reliant on them being super stable? Well, the switchers themselves generally are pretty stable, and then a lot of these higher end units, like my 2ME Production Studio and the 4ME and the Constellation, have redundant power supplies in them. So they're meant to be able to withstand either the failure of a power supply or failure of a power source. So you can connect to two different power sources. You can have one on a generator and one on house power or whatever. But generally speaking, the switchers themselves have traditionally been quite reliable. If you're in a situation where you can't have something go down, you can add a second switcher, duplicate the inputs going into the second switcher, and then if there's ever a problem, you switch from the output of one to the output of another to go to your live stream. It gets very expensive very fast, and you're having to duplicate signals, which in and of itself can be very expensive, because either you're doubling the size of a routing switcher or doing signal distribution amplifiers in order to send to multiple switchers at the same time. Generally, we don't worry about it, we just make sure we're, in the case of my switcher, I make sure that it's very adequately cooled, make sure that it doesn't overheat, doesn't get too hot, and make sure that it's getting clean power. And that generally, generally speaking, will make sure that it is going to be as stable as possible. Okay, other than that one issue, I have never had an issue with my ATEM. I've been using this one for 4 years, I've been using other ATEMs for over 5 years now, and they just haven't given me any trouble. So in this case, and not much, it wasn't the fault of the switcher, it was a piece of software from outside sending in bad data that caused it to crash. So maybe they could improve the code, but you have to always question whether it's worth it for a manufacturer to put all that extra effort in to protect from something that's coming from the outside, and it's not coming from one of their own products. So yeah, I mean, you can build your own redundancy if you want, but most of it's fine. It just isn't worth it. So, I need to blow my nose, guys. Okay, all right. Let's see. Redundant switchers is kind of the only answer. Yeah. Redundant power supplies can make a big difference. Yep. So yeah, the critical equipment I have in the trailer, so my ATEM 2ME Production Studio and my smart video hubs, the 40x40 units, they both have redundant power supplies in them. So I don't have them hooked up in the moment, but traditionally in the past I had one hooked up to shore power and one hooked up to inverter power, and that gave me two sources right there. I have since rewired some things and I haven't hooked that back up again, but yeah, that's kind of been my solution in the past. So right now I don't have two dedicated power sources here in the trailer. So anyway, yeah, so caught up. I can't believe it. I've been going a long time too. So you guys have any other questions? How many people are actually even watching? 41. Okay, that's not a lot. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap up in a couple minutes. So I'll start with just kind of go over some of the stuff that I started at the beginning of my prior stream. So there's some cool things coming up here on the channel before too long. So if you're new, please consider subscribing so you can watch these videos. First one I want to talk about. I bought one of the M1 processor versions of the Mac Mini exactly a month ago today, and I've been doing a ton of testing with it to find out how well it works in the video production environment. So, video rendering, live streaming, what hardware does it work with, that kind of thing. I've put in a ton of time on it. I've got over 200 hours in video rendering alone, in addition to other things that I've been doing, and I've been comparing that to other computers that I own, including some that are kind of in the same ballpark price range, to see how well they compare with one another. And I'll say this much already: the results are very, very surprising. Not at all what I expected. And I'm not going to reveal what I found, but I'm going to be releasing a video about that here in the next couple of weeks, about my findings on that. And that's definitely something you're going to want to see, because my findings don't really line up with what other people have found in the past, in both good and bad ways. No, please nobody think that I'm a Mac hater. I do own Macs. I use Macs for some things. I prefer Windows for most things, but I wanted to give the new M1 chip a fair shake and see how well it does. You know, if it was going to be amazing, I would have no problem buying more of them to help with my video production workflow. And so anyway, I bought one. I've been doing a ton of testing on it, and that video is going to be available here on the channel in the coming weeks. I don't have an exact date on it. I'm still doing a handful more tests. I'm still trying to get a hold of a relatively new MacBook Pro, Intel-based, that I can compare contemporary equipment against contemporary equipment. So I'm still working on that. I have not been able to get a hold of one just yet, but I'm still working on it. Another video I've got coming up here before too long, I'm going to be doing a full walkthrough on the intercom system that I have here in the trailer. Anybody who watches the channel regularly knows that I replaced my old intercom system with a new solution back in December. And it's very non-traditional, but it also gives me a lot of very, very cool capabilities that you don't just get anywhere else. So I'm going to be doing a video about that. And so if that's something that interests you, definitely stay tuned and make sure you're subscribed in order to see that video coming up as well. So, I don't have any other big announcements for the channel, but if you're not familiar with how this is set up, I do have memberships that are available here on the channel. So if you look just below this video, there is a join button there. And I also do have Patreon. And people who have signed up for either one of those things first of all, they get early access to new videos that are here on the channel, at least 24 hours early and without the advertising. So there's that perk. But there's also a ton of other videos that I'm producing and putting on there as well. What I'm really trying to do is produce just as many videos for those viewers as for everybody else. So I'm trying to do one-to-one. And a lot of those videos there are behind the scenes. Like, for example, I very often will stream me shooting videos for the channel. And so people can get early access to that, and they can also weigh in and ask questions. That actually helps me because I make sure that people are getting the information that they need as I go. So as I'm shooting the video, I'll monitor the chat room and see what questions people have, and then try and include that information in the video that I'm making. So there's that. But I also do behind the scenes for events as well. Like as I mentioned a minute ago, we did a live stream showing the multi-view for my switcher, as well as including intercom audio, so you guys could really get a behind the scenes for what was really going on during that award show. We live streamed that for supporters of the channel, so those who are members and those who are on Patreon. So that kind of stuff. And then I also have re-released some old videos that I had taken down years ago, made those available for members and Patreon supporters as well. The plan, again, is to have just as much content available for paying members as I have for the public. So if you're a paying member, you're getting double the content that you do if you're just watching the public version of the channel here. So my voice is going. I need to wrap this up. So I'll take these last couple of questions and then we'll go. So Fareed saying, in Canada, we're here on full lockdown still. How are you finding work there in this situation? We're doing a lot more virtual events. We're still doing a lot of in-person things. They just don't have audiences. But yeah, we're doing a lot of virtual events, a lot of stuff via Zoom. And then Oscar, I don't know how to say her name, unfortunately. Any tips on how to make those video hub routers less noisy? So any of the Blackmagic equipment that has fans in it, my voice is really shot. You can open it up and replace the fans with quieter fans. So Noctua, N-O-C-T-U-A, is the brand that makes really quiet fans that have equivalent sizes to the ones that are inside this piece of equipment. And you might have to do some soldering in order to connect the wire from the Noctua fans to the factory fans, but the Noctua fans are way, way, way quieter and do a better job cooling as well. So if noise is a problem, again, you're going to avoid your warranty, no question, by doing this. But if getting the noise down is something that's really important to you, that's a way to do it. So Anyway, that's going to have to do it for me. My voice is really gone. It's actually hurting to talk at this point. So, but thanks everyone for watching this kind of impromptu stream. Sorry about the interruption we had earlier. Some weird YouTube quirk. I don't know what it was, but I lost my connection to YouTube, so I had to end that stream early. But anyway, so again, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one. We'll see you later.